All right, Kirk, take it away.
All right. Well, okay. Everybody, stretch your arms. Get up. It's like the person on the cruise boat, right? Get you out doing exercises in the morning or something. But we are going to spend a little time on motives. What are our motives as we engage this political power? Because that's the focus, right? Ultimately, that's what we're talking about. Just what, how should the church engage this particular expression of power? To what end? How should we, if we do involve ourselves in it, what's our motives? What are the intentions of our heart as we seek to engage this? And before I do, I just want to remind, I think it's important to remind us, because it was a theme that came up last night, and I think something that both Nick and I wanted to emphasize throughout this. And it's summarized, I think, ultimately in this verse from Hebrews 13:14. Here we have no lasting city, but we seek the city that is to come. Here we have no lasting city, but we seek the city that is to come. Now, of course, he's writing to a people that are suffering persecution. And he's reminding them as they are threatening, or as they feel so threatened by it, that they want to withdraw and go back to something that was safe for them, something that wouldn't cause friction for them. And yet the argument is that you can't go back. There's no place to go back to. Christ is the fulfillment of all that had been anticipated. But ultimately, the argument then also pushes it towards the idea that we have something out in the future. We have something that is our real home, our real hope. And with that in mind, then we persevere. And if need be, we suffer. And we talked about that some last night. But this idea that we have no lasting city, but we seek the city that is to come, is not to denigrate the realities of where we live or to cause us to withdraw. It's just to give us some perspective. It's supposed to give us some perspective that says what we're going through right now is not ultimate, and our attempts to respond to what's going on right now should not be motivated by some sense that we're creating heaven on earth, because that's not going to happen. That's a utopian dream that gets expressed all across, right? The entire spectrum of all the worldviews that are on display right now, all the ways in which we're going to solve society's problems. If you just do what I tell you to do, if you just believe the way I believe, you just see things the way I see things, we'll have heaven on earth. And while we acknowledge that there will be heaven on earth, ultimately in the new heavens and the new earth, this side of that reality, we can strive for more and more of God's presence and blessing, and offer that to our neighbors. But we shouldn't be fooled into thinking that politics is going to solve that for us. And as Nigari quoted from Psalm 146, I had made a note, Psalm 118, 8 and 9, it is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in man. It is better to take refuge than to trust in princes. And that leads me into the first thing I want to talk about regarding motives. What motivates us as we think about engaging in political power? And I think one of the things that we want to be mindful of, and I think sometimes, at least from my observation, that causes Christians to get really actively involved or to be affected by the latest polls that come out, to feel as though the world is falling apart because of the Rasmussen poll, the Gallup poll, the Real Politics statements, that all of these things cause us anxiety. And it's because, it seems to me, that we are putting too much, whether we intentionally do that or not, we're putting too much our refuge in man, our refuge in princes. And part of, I think, the reason to do that is because things feel threatening, and so we are fearful. And what it reminds me of, however, is a story from 2 Kings, and this is about King Ahaz. And maybe you remember who he is. If you've read 2 Kings, you might have just blown by it because he's just one more terrible king. And you go, okay, all right, one more terrible king. But there's something here that I think is somewhat instructive. It says this in this is 2 Kings 16. In the 17th year of Pekah, son of Remaliah, Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. Ahaz was 20 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 16 years in Jerusalem. He did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord his God, and his father David had done, but he walked in the way of the kings of Israel. Now, if you're a king of Judah and versus the king of Israel, the kings of Israel are uniformly apostate. And what we've got here is a king of Judah who's sitting on the throne of the David, where God had promised that there would be one always to sit upon the throne. He has become more like the kings of Israel. It says this: he even burned his son as an offering according to the despicable practices of the nations whom the Lord drove out before his people. And he sacrificed and made offerings on the high places and on the hills and under every green tree. So before we go even any further, what we already see about Ahaz is he's thinking like a pagan, right? He's thinking like a non-Israelite. He's thinking like a one who is not in covenant with the one true living God, who made and upholds all creation, governing all history to his good end. Now he's abandoned that posture. He's abandoned that reality, that understanding, and he's embraced fully a worldview, a pagan worldview, even to the point of sacrificing one of his sons, of burning one of his sons upon an altar to a pagan god in order to try to get that God's favor. So it says this, well, this king of Syria and the king who's running Israel at that time, what they want Ahaz to do is to join with them to fight against Assyria, this threatening nation, warlike nation. It's threatening. And he's reluctant to do that. He doesn't want to do that. And so what they want to do is attack him so they can remove him and put some other king that's more like, one of their, like a puppet for them to serve, so they can try to join together to fight against Assyria. Well, that's not what Ahaz wants to do. So what he does, Ahaz actually sends messengers to Tilgath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I am your servant and your son. Come up and rescue me from the hand of the king of Syria and from the hand of King of Israel, who are attacking me. And he also sends tribute. So when this political ruler, when this person felt his power was being threatened, his influence, his place was being threatened, he doesn't turn to the living God to be the one who will deliver him, because he's already stepped away from that. He already has this pagan mindset. And what he does is he goes to make an alliance with Assyria. He makes alliance with another pagan nation, a powerful pagan nation, in order to protect himself against these other threats that are coming in. And, I think there's something instructive in that, when we want to be mindful that, if we as the people of God feel threatened by the forces that are at work out in the world, whether they're expressing themselves politically or however they're expressing themselves culturally, and all cultural is political, I suppose we could argue in one way, shape, or form, if we take the idea that politics is the exercise of authority or the attempt to govern with the authority that God has given, as I argued. When people are trying to use that against us in some way, shape, or form, our response is self-protective. Our response can be fearful, and we are willing to make alliances even with Assyria against our enemies. And I think we need to be careful of that. I think that is something that shows our motives. And our motive is to protect ourselves. It's self-protective. It is an attempt at making personal peace for ourselves. And we're even willing to do that with someone who categorically denies the reality of God, who everything about their system, their thought, their commitments are contrary to what God wants in the world, that we can clearly see revealed in his word. Now, again, we've already argued over and over again that we shouldn't expect that every ruler is going to be Christian. We should expect to be able to work with non-Christian rulers in exercising power and so on and so forth. But when our motives are fear, it begins to cloud our eyes. We begin to make very unwise decisions. We begin to hitch ourselves to certain movements and ideas that really undermine our testimony, because it exposes our lack of faith in the living God. we are taking our refuge in man. We are taking our refuge in princes rather than taking our refuge in the Lord. So I think that Ahaz's story exposes one of the problems when we talk about motives. If our motive is fear, if our motive is self-protection, if our motive is personal peace, then we will find ourselves doing things that in the end will not serve what we are looking for, but also has the potential to bring reproach upon the name of Christ, because we just allied ourselves with things we ought not to have allied ourselves with, because we've been motivated by fear. Now, what should motivate us? If it shouldn't be just personal peace, self-protection, then what might it be? Well, it should be a desire for peace for all, right? If we go back to our definition of living well in the city, that is that how do we use the power, the authority granted to us so that we can live together in a way that causes society, people to flourish, that causes our neighbors to benefit from what we know about to be the truth about who God is and how he's created the world and what's the best practices in order to tap into all that potential that God has built into his creation. If our intention is to see that, then we want to step into the use of power in a way that is for the other. There are warnings in Scripture about that Jesus offers and the apostles offer about a bad use of power. You might remember when it shows up in the Gospels when there's a desire in the part of James and John, right, for prominent places within the kingdom. The account from Matthew 20, for instance, the mother of sons of Zebedee came up to him with her sons kneeling before him. She asked him something, and he said to her, "What do you want?" And she said to him, "Say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left in your kingdom." And Jesus answered, "You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?" They said to him, "We are able." He said to them, "You will drink of my cup, but to sit at my right hand and my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared by my Father." So without even talking about all that he's talking about, what he is challenging is this desire to sit in places of power, and he's going to expose that the fact their desire, their motive for why they want to sit there is not in line with the way in which power is meant to be exercised by those who follow Jesus. He said, but he called them to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you. But whoever who would be great among you must be your servant. Whoever be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." So there's a way in which our power is to be used, and that is not in the sense of lording it over others in order to control others so that it serves us, but that we use the authority, the opportunity given to exercise that authority in a way that serves others, to serve the desires, the needs of others. This is expressed as well when Peter is writing to those who serve with an authority within the church. "So I exhort the elders among you, as fellow elder and as a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that's going to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eagerly, not domineering over those in your charge, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory." Now, he's talking about the use of power within the church. But there is a sense, right, isn't there, that this kind of exercise of love, this kind of exercise of power expresses also what Jesus argues for when it comes to the idea of love. How is it that we are to love our neighbors? And in order to love our neighbors, then we have to see our neighbors not as enemies. We don't see them as those that we can quickly label and write off because they're this, they're this, they're this, they're this. But we see them as fellow image bearers of God. We see them as those who live with us And so we're looking to live well, and that includes them. And there is this posture then of someone who has been brought underneath the discipleship of Jesus, that posture is one of service, that one is ready to help the other. There are two ways, I think, when we want to look about the idea of love. And ultimately, obviously, I'm arguing that our motive when we enter in to engage politics should be motivated by this sense of love. I think there's two things that the Bible means by love. And one definition comes from an Anglican bishop of the 1800s, W. Griffin Thomas. Love is the outgoing of the entire nature and self-sacrificing service. Love is the outgoing of the entire nature and self-sacrificing service. And the second is one that comes from C.S. Lewis. Love is not affectionate feeling, but a steady wish for the loved person's ultimate good as far as can be obtained. Now, if that adequately encapsulates a view of love as Jesus teaches it, that idea of an outgoing of the entire nature of in self-sacrificing service, and love, not necessarily an affectionate feeling, but a steady wish for the loved person's ultimate good as far as can be obtained. That isn't just for those within the church, though it is certainly for those within the church, but it's also meant to be for those outside of the church as well. And if our motive is love, if our motive is motivated by this self-sacrificing service, if our motive is to a steady wish for the loved person's ultimate good as far as can be obtained, then that transforms our understanding of why it is that we want to access political power, why we want to be engaged, why we run for office, why it is that we would vote certain people in and not other people in, why we would advocate for certain laws and not other laws. Because what we're being motivated for is not creating our own personal peace, not creating just our own protection, but we're actually seeking to do good for the other. We are motivated by this steady wish for the good of the others. Now, it's clear that if we come from a perspective that we say, no, God has created the world. He has put within the world, it's a self-revelation on the part of God, as Paul argues, as Psalm 19 argues, it's an act of self-revelation on the part of God, that he's built into his creation, things that reflect him, his character, his attributes, his righteousness, his holiness, his justice, his mercy, all of these things. These are things that somehow are woven into the fabric of his creation. And when human beings live according to how God has revealed himself in creation, and as well as in their own selves, in their own being, that is good. That is ultimately what we want to see happen. If we think of it in terms that it is in order that the other might actually experience that good, that our motive is love as we advocate, as we work, as we engage. If our attitude is really love, that they would experience that good, then I think we begin to have a motive that causes us to want to use this kind of power and engage this power, however, whether directly or indirectly, by reason of a vote or by reason of actually being in public office. We have a very different mindset than Ahaz. We have a very different mindset of personal protection. And when we do that, then we are expressing the fact that indeed we have no lasting city here, but we seek the city that is to come. We understand that our ultimate reward, our ultimate refuge is in what God has done for us and has held out before us in the gospel. And we are released, therefore, then to love our neighbor. And that's something that I've harped on in our church over the years, is one of the things that Martin Luther argues in his treatise of Christian liberty, or the freedom of a Christian, is the whole idea of justification by faith releases us. It releases us to love God and to love our neighbor. And so, again, if I know I'm taking this in a different direction for just a minute, but if we understand that we cannot save ourselves, that only God can save us, that we are only saved not by what we do, but by what God has done for us. And when our faith brings us into union with Christ, when our faith brings us back into relationship with God, then we are secure in that knowledge, right? That we're no longer having to try to persuade God to love us. He's shown us that he loves us by giving of his son. And Luther argues, we're no longer using our neighbor to prove to God that we are good people. We are actually free to now love our neighbor for the neighbor's sake. And so as Protestants, we are really, and others I'm sure, but from the position of speaking as a Protestant, that one of the tenets that we have of our faith is that we're justified by faith. That is something that secures us in the hope that we have a city. Our hope is secure, that we can place our refuge in God no matter what the circumstance is, because he's already proven the depths and height and breadth and width of his love. That how shall he not freely give us all things, as Paul says. Knowing that, then we can have our confidence in God, and we can then turn to truly love our neighbor and serve them for their good. We're not doing it to prove them God, but we're also recognize that our place in God is secure, and that actually frees us. No matter what transpires in our life, nothing can separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. So if our motive is love, then we take hold of this kind of power in a very different way. We're using it now for the betterment of people because we love these people, because we have found the grace of God to actually love them and not see them as enemies and not label them as whatever you want to label them. And however our enemies get labeled, as somehow because they're labeled that way because we feel that they're a threat to us. But if our hope is secure and in the knowledge of God, if our hope rests in him, if we know that here we have no continued city, but we do have a city that awaits for us, then we are liberated. We are liberated to actually engage in the culture, engage in the world around us with freedom, with liberty. We're secure in God, and we are released now to truly love our neighbor. So when we come then to a verse like Paul's in Galatians, right? So then as we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, and especially to those who are the household of faith. Yes, we have a primary obligation to the people in the household of faith, but we're called to do good to everyone. Why? Because we're called to do it. Because we're supposed to reflect the nature of God's kindness and mercy and grace on the earth, because we're called to be salt and light, because we've been released to do this, because God has secured us. And we know ourselves not deserving of any of the grace and mercy of God, but nonetheless, God has done that for us. We turn and look at people, we see them for what they are, fallen just as we are, struggling with the world around us just as we are, and we're ready to try to, as much as we're allowed, as much as we're able to, C.S. Lewis says, to press for their good, to press for a life for them that they get to experience what it means to live according to how God has created things. The famous verse from Micah, again, gets dragged out all the time, but it's such an important one, right? The people are asking God, what shall we do? Shall we sacrifice all this? Shall we do all this religious work? Shall we do all this to show how that we're faithful followers of you? And through the prophet comes back and says, he has told you, O man, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Now, think about that. If our motive is to embody and to enact, to live out what God says he's requires of us, is to do justice, love kindness, love mercy, love steadfast love, and to walk humbly with your God. It's again, if people are blinded to see it, if they want to reject it, if they think somehow the justice that we offer or the mercy that we believe is necessary, or the humility is a sign of weakness, I don't know how it might be interpreted. If they want to reject it, they reject it. But if we are doing this, I'm going to suggest that we're actually going to be people that are much more compelling. That we're going to be seen not as another interest group that just wants their way, that wants self-protection, wants their personal peace. We're actually going to be seen as people who are doing for our world around us, even seeking in this particular sphere of exercising political power, we're actually using it for the benefit of others. And I think that will require, as Nick kind of argued in the last session, it will require that we broaden our view of what constitutes justice. That is, what other areas of life does justice need to be sought? In what areas, other areas of life, is mercy needed? And that if we're willing to expand our understanding of that and to appreciate how it is that other parts of the body might indeed have a keener sense of justice in this area or a keener sense of justice in this area, and that rather than viewing that as somehow abandoning this area, but rather seeing it as a broader expression of the body of Christ, seeking to love their neighbor as themselves, then I think our motives become much more clear, much more evident. We're not infighting. We're not denying the realities of what other people are doing, because they're responding to this call to love our neighbor as ourselves. It's interesting. I should probably stop in a minute, so there's time here. We said we're going to stop at noon. Excuse me, I'm just looking for what here it is. Even the President of the United States takes a vow. And I'm going to read it for you just a little. It's very brief. And some people add, "So help me God," afterwards. It's not part, apparently, of the original oath, I don't believe. But anyway. And for many years, a hand was placed on the Bible, and I think it might have even been the one that George Washington used or something like that. But you can hear in this acceptance of political power for the purpose of service. "I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will do to the best of my ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States." So someone's taking political power, and in our context, at this point in the world, the most powerful person in the world, and one would have to argue the most powerful position that has ever existed in the world, that they come into that with the idea that they are swearing to serve. They're going to serve the Constitution, and by that to serve the United States. Similarly, when someone takes a military vow, this powerful potential use of power within the world, one says this when they enter into the army: "I, so and so, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and orders of the officers appointed over me according to the regulations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, so help me God." That's actually in the thing. Again, all I'm saying is that even in these kinds of things, which are very nationalistic, which are very focused on a particular nation and a particular task within that nation, yet there is embodied within this sense of being there to serve the purpose that I've been called to. And there is an otherness to it, this outward lookingness to it. Now, some might argue that that's a far cry from what Jesus is asking us when we love our neighbors, that we would bear arms against them. But that's another discussion. But the whole idea that use of political power, even by the highest office of the land, has built within it, in the vow of the president, the vow of somebody enters into the military, that they are there not for themselves, but to serve the other. And I think that reflects what I've been driving at, this sense that in fact, as we ourselves engage these kinds of political processes, as we advocate for certain laws, as we strive for certain policies, as we seek to push back against certain policies, as we elect certain people in and certain people to not go in. That should be, as members of the kingdom of God, a desire to see this kind of power being used, not for ourselves, but for the other. And when we do that, then I think we have to have confidence that God will take care of us. He will take care of us. And what we need to do is, by his grace, show how it is that his desire is to take care of others as well. I think I've said enough.